Hello, everybody. Justin and I have been having slight technical kerfuffles, and it's my turn to say hello this morning because it's Justin's source. We have a very technical method for who says hello, and I figured out Justin's method a little while ago, which was that if you choose the source, you don't say hello. And I thought he was being really clever and having this really big memory. And actually, he just knew that whoever chose the source, it was the other person. So anyway, now I'm privy to that secret. I know what I'm doing. So, good morning, everybody. This is Turning Towards Life. Okay. Justin and I are doing a by hook or by crook, Turning Towards Life, both being in different locations than our homes this weekend for various birthdays we're attending. I'm in Rugby near Leicester in the UK, and Justin's in the Cotswolds. So we're both in very different places and making our technology work from different locations. And it's very lovely to be here. I can feel the support already of just being in the conversation and the kind of balm it is for me. So I'm very grateful to be here. And this is probably episode 92 of this Thirdspace project, Turning Towards Life project with Justin Wise and Lizzie Winn. And if you're listening on Facebook, you're very, very welcome. And if you're listening on a podcast, you're also very welcome. Thank you for joining us and being part of this community. It very much matters to us that you're here and that we are all in this conversation together, even if it looks like it's Justin and I having a conversation and you listening. We also know that you're right here and that everybody commenting and everybody having the conversations they have subsequently and talking to us when they meet us in person. It's a very beautiful thing that's being made, continuing to be made. So a very warm welcome to you, and thank you, Justin, for picking the source for us today. It's very beautiful.
You're so welcome, Lizzie. Good morning, everybody. Lizzie, I need to tell you that the background noise where you are is quite high, so
okay,
it might help. What are you going to do? You're going to move around, or you could
try and move while you're talking. I'll okay. Try and move to a quiet location. We'll see what I can do.
So this is everyone. One of the part of our big commitment with Turning Towards Life is to do it every week, regardless of where we are. Which, as many of you will know, has sometimes meant one of us being up in the middle of the night, or finding inventive ways to connect to the internet in the middle of a mountain in Guatemala or whatever it is. So, Lizzie, I'm enjoying very much seeing you
scrabble through
walk
the
around where you are. Yes, scrabble around to find somewhere to sit where there aren't other people.
Yeah. I found a windowsill, people.
That's great. Okay, great. So I'm also going to say good morning, everybody, and welcome. There's much quieter, Lizzie. That's wonderful. Welcome to Turning Towards Life. I'm also away, as Lizzie said, in the Cotswolds. We're celebrating a very special 80th birthday for someone in my family. So that's been a very, very nice thing to do. And I think we should dive into the source that we have for this week. And I want to say something that I've chosen it very much with, I've been thinking a lot about time and about what time is. I think we started talking about this over the last few weeks, but it's certainly the case that as we've been in the midst of celebrating an 80th birthday, I've been thinking a lot about how strange time is and also how unavoidable time is. So there's this way in which, at least for me, I can find myself sometimes first of all, of course, wondering where time went, but also having all kinds of judgments about time going past, like this shouldn't have happened, and being in comparison with people who are at different stages of their lives without really seeing where I am in my life. So I wanted to find a source that would help us maybe talk about all of that and who knows what else. And as always, you can, if you're with us this morning, you can find our source on our Facebook page. And if you're listening or watching later, you can also always find our source on our website, which is turningtowards.life. And this is The Path by Lynn Unger. Life, the saying goes, is a journey, and who could argue with that? We've all experienced the surprising turns, the nearly impassable swamp, the meadow of flowers that turned out not to be quite so blissful and benign as we first thought, the crest of the hill where the road smoothed out and sloped towards home. Our job, we say, is to remain faithful to the path before us, which is an assumption as common as it is absurd. Really? Look ahead. What do you see? If there is a path marked out in front of you, it was almost certainly laid down for someone else. The path only unfolds behind us, our steps themselves laying down the road. You can look back and see the signposts, the ones you followed and the ones you missed, but there are no markers for what lies ahead. You can tell the story of how you forded the stream or got lost on the shortcut that wasn't, how you trekked your way to courage or a heart. But all of that comes after the fact. There is no road ahead. There is only the walking, the tales we weave of our adventures, and the songs we sing to call our companions on.
Thank you, Justin. Our job, we say, is to remain faithful to the path before us, which is an assumption as common as it is absurd. Really? Look ahead. What do you see? If there is a path marked out in front of you, it was almost certainly laid down for someone else. The path only unfolds behind us, our steps themselves laying down the road. You can look back and see the signposts, the ones you followed and the ones you missed, but there are no markers for what lies ahead. You can tell the story of how you forded the stream or got lost on the shortcut that wasn't, how you trekked your way to courage or a heart, but all of that comes after the fact. There is no road ahead. There is only the walking, the tales we weave of our adventures, and the songs we sing to call our companions on.
So here's one of the things that's happening for me, just hearing you read this, is first of all, is finding myself feeling a lot less afraid. Because I realize that a lot of the difficulties I get into with making judgments or comparisons about my life have a lot to do with where I'm meant to have got to. That's one part. Like I'm meant to be here because that was the path. And there's so much trouble in that. But the second one is I meant to know what's coming and I'm meant to be able to do something about it so that I can be in control and in charge of it. And I've noticed that a lot. I think I've certainly spoken with you, but I think I've spoken with you here on Turning Towards Life, Lizzie, about my relationship to what I read and see in the news, and that I realize that often when I'm reading the news, I'm not reading with a sort of passive interest in, oh, what's going on in the world? I want to educate myself. And of course, the news is always somebody's choice about what is interesting and important to write about. And more as I go on, I see how much that leaves out. But anyway, often when I'm reading, I'm reading because I realize what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out how will I, given what's apparently happening in the world, how will I make sure that my life works out in a very particular way? And I'm sort of trying to, if this happens, then this, and if this happens, then this, and if this happens, then this. So Lynn Unger really reminds me that there's never any knowing, that the whole world could turn around. Tomorrow morning, we might wake up and many things will be different in unexpected ways. And that's also true of our lives close in. It's not just true of the bigger situation in which we're in. It's always true. So all there is to do is to take the next step that we can take from here. And as I settle into that, I can feel my courage and my care blooming and growing, and my feeling afraid and my sense that I ought to know what to do, all of it, and I ought to have it all worked out, dropping. So at least that's the first. There's more in this too, but I want to just say that and stop here and see what you have to say.
Yeah, I feel there's, like as always with all the sources, there's so much here, and the beautiful part that sticks out primarily for me is about faith in this poem, and the fact that it mentions that there are these paths that are marked out for someone else that we think might be our own. And I think that links into what you're saying about comparison. You know, there's so much of our, somehow, I haven't quite analysed why we compare ourselves to each other all the time, very much actually. I don't know, I haven't reached any conclusions for myself about why we do that, but I know that I do it and that we do it. And the thing about the path is that there's this kind of connotation in our minds that like you know, I'm there's a road behind me, and it just makes me realize that when you're on a road, you it's guaranteed that there's going to be more road. You don't necessarily know what that is, but there is a road. And so I think generally in our minds we have a way of thinking that a path is something that's already there, and this poem turns it around to have us be the pavement layers as we step. So we choose to where to lay the paving and step on it. And that feels like it returns my life to me somehow. Like it's giving me back what my life path is, instead of adopting another one that's already been laid or something. And I think in many ways, of course, we're treading because of everything that's gone before us. And so maybe we're treading a path that's already been laid for us in some way that I don't know or understand. But broadly, what I feel like this poem does is it shows us that we are makers. We're not victims of a path that's already here or something. And I think, you know, a big piece of Thirdspace and Turning Towards Life is this is the essence of it, which is to be the person who is the kind of author of one's way of being in the world, rather than someone who's asleep and just keeping on doing the thing that everybody did before. And so it feels to me like it's a gift of showing us something real about our lives in the way we tread and how we tread, and the signposts we decide to follow brings about this path. And that feels to me like an exciting thing, and that I have a new something to forge that's my life, and not the life that or the path or the set of actions or the circumstances or the job or the location of where I live is determined for me somehow.
Seems to me I'm very interested in this question of comparison that we've got into. And I think for me, one of the things I notice about it is that my comparisons with other people's lives in a way kind of get me off the hook. That if I can compare myself, for example, with, you know, a really common thing for me to do is to compare myself with school friends, you know, people who I had spent formative years with, and then our lives have gone off and done whatever we've done. And amongst my school friends, there's I'm not in contact with very many of them, but I see the lives of some people every now and again, and our lives in so many ways are very different. Some people are very famous, and some people are doing very close in ordinary day-to-day things that really matter in their own way. Some people have had lives that look like, from the outside, like they're very easy. Some people have had lives that look like they're filled with difficulty. And when I compare, the way in which it gets me off the hook is it frees me from taking a certain kind of responsibility. So I can go mostly the way that I go with my own sort of sense of self-criticism that's so easy for me is to go, oh, my life hasn't turned out the way it ought to have done. I haven't been responsible enough. I haven't been brave enough. I haven't been loving enough, and all of those kind of things. And it frees me, the gift in it, which is not a gift I really want to take, is it frees me from actually taking responsibility for the life that I've lived. I can sort of sideline the life that I've actually lived and not really look at it, because I've always got somebody else's path to look at. And in a way, it kind of keeps a sort of identity going of somebody who couldn't figure it out, or somebody who didn't know what to do, all those kinds of things. So how we come at this has the opportunity to keep an identity going, or it has the opportunity for us to have contact with an identity that may be way more life-giving. And the way more life-giving part of it from this poem has these two angles that I can see, at least for me. One is growing up enough to really admit that we don't know what on earth is going on. You know, this thing that we have when we're children, we think the adults have it all figured out, and then we become adults and we realize that there is a whole load of things that come with being an adult, but one of them that we don't get is, I know what's going on. Like, I really know what's going on. So can we be kind enough and brave enough to admit I really don't know what's going on enough with the world to know what's coming? But the second thing I realized that it makes it possible, and Lynn Unger points to this very strongly in her poem, is it allows us also to have a different relationship with the past. So we can look back and we can also see that what our lives are is a life that has been lived so far. And this is one of the, I think one of the, you know, Lizzie, you were musing about why is it that we get into comparison, and I think a lot of that is handed us by our culture, which is a highly comparative culture that we live in. But the other thing I'm realizing is that we live in a culture that values future possibility much, much more than life completed. So it's why we elevate the young and denigrate the old in our culture. But actually, as Lynn Unger says, there's really something to be said for, look at what I've lived and the sense I make of it now from here, that I could never have known. And then what that looked beautiful was not always beautiful, and what looked promising was not always promising. And there's a kind of returning to ourselves and the simple truthfulness of our lives without all of the sort of drama and melodrama that we add to it about, oh, woe is me, and look at how I'm doing compared to everyone else, that comes from standing on that solid vantage point, that really the only solid vantage point is this moment, the step I'm about to take, and all that's come before.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, Justin, and this whole thing of our lives to now. I think you kind of pointed to this, but there's such an incredible way that we can brush off all that we are and all that we've done and all that we've achieved and the distance we've come and the nuance that's become us. And it's such a kind of, in a way, like a violent sweep. You know, it's like you said, the word denigrate. It's like there's a way we denigrate what is, what has been. And I find myself always quite kind of shocked about that in a way. Like if someone asks me, like even the simple things like, how was your weekend? And sometimes I find it really hard to even remember what I've done at the weekend. And I have to just sit for a minute. Like it's not ready here, and I clearly haven't been conscious or grateful enough that I would just have it right here to say, because I'm off in another world of a Monday morning or whatever it is. And I feel like we have this capacity just to shove things into the background really quickly, including our whole life experience and what's happened. And as you were talking, Justin, I was thinking, I bet there are plenty of people who compare themselves to you. And you know, it's not about the content. It's not about anyone being better than anyone else. It's a dynamic, because it's, you know, you're this eloquent, intelligent, kind, warm man in the world who has this deep background in philosophy and computer science, and have been educated to this incredible degree, and you know what I mean, like this, and your musicality and the roundedness of you and your poetry and your writing. I mean, there's so many things that everybody could compare themselves to, with you and with me. Like it's like everybody. And in that moment, we come sweep ourselves aside because we're doing that thing. And it's actually a kind of, in this moment, I'm feeling it's a very denigrating, self-denigrating thing to do. And that the minute we begin talking to one another and valuing ourselves and appreciating the life that we have and what's here for us and what's gone before, and we tell the story of appreciation of whatever's happened, there's a chance to turn back inside to one's own world instead of grasping at all the others. And that seems to me a very kind, fulfilling, like I feel even saying it, like, oh, I can find some dignity in that. And instead of feeling like a grasper or a desperate person, I suddenly kind of come into myself and I think, oh, I have some power here. I'm not a scrabbler and a desperate person, but I can feel myself. I've got contact with myself. And that feels like a very, very important move for a life that feels like it has wholesomeness in it.
I was feeling the same possibility of feeling filled by our lives that you talked about by talking about fulfillment. And what you're saying is helping me to see that somehow, and I never know if this is a factor of our times or and our place, or if this has always been what human beings have had to grapple with, and who knows, how can we know? But the sense that so many of us have of being essentially empty and I need to be filled, I think is partly what gets us into this trouble, because with all the comparison, I really appreciate what you're saying, Lizzie, that any of us can compare ourselves to any others of us and often find something that feels like it's wanting and something that feels like it needs to be filled. Then in a way, what we're doing is maybe what happens is we're expressing a very basic human feeling, which is something's missing. And I have to get the something that's missing, and we can turn that feeling into we can sort of turn it in lots of different ways. So we can turn it into comparison with someone else. If I was more like Lizzie then, and I had the life I imagine you have, then I would feel filled. Or we can turn it towards the future, and we could say, if I could get to that place over there, which I know I'm meant to get to because whatever it is, then I will feel fulfilled. And the problem with it is if it's the feeling that something is missing is something that's basic to human beings, that it's something to do with the kind of creativity we have and the kind of openness we have and the kind of imagination that we have, that we can always imagine a way in which things could be different. The trouble that we have is we take that feeling and we project it onto everything and in everyone. So my life is unfulfilled because I feel this emptiness, and it would be fulfilled if I could just walk the path that I'm meant. If I could just know, for goodness sake, what the path was. If I knew what the path was and how to get there, then I would be fulfilled. So what if the mistake is to imagine that we fill ourselves up by projecting onto other people or projecting into the future, and instead the move to make to have us know the fullness of our own experience and the fullness of our lives, whatever there is to do exactly what you're saying, is to stand where we are, and is to be able to feel and pay attention to and see what's right here, and also what has already been. Whatever kind of lives we've lived, the richness of its weave and the fullness of it, even if much was missing that we longed for, which I think we're saying in one way or another always is missing that we long for. And then we don't have to have there be a road ahead that we know in order to sort all of this out. You know, there's a way in which we're adding suffering onto an already basic existing human kind of suffering by having all of that. There's a lovely line from a poem that we might read one day here, which you know, Lizzie, called Love After Love by Derek Walcott, in which he says, sit and feast on your life. And in the light of what you're saying, I'm understanding that in a new way. And the last thing that strikes me to say about this at this particular moment is, and I suppose this is the one that's very alive for me in this birthday celebration that I'm in this weekend for someone who I really love and care about, is we also then don't have to, our capacity to be filled by life isn't then dependent upon having great swathes of future time left to live. Like, I'll be fulfilled because I've got 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or 60 years or 80 years. Maybe I only have a day, or maybe I only have an hour, which is potentially true for all of us. Although as we get older, of course, it becomes more and more true. We don't have to have that be the source of being filled by life. We can also have all that has carried me to this moment. And that, of course, accumulates over time.
Yeah, it's very lovely, Justin, hearing you. And funnily enough, it's reminding me of when I was probably like 18 or 19. And I seem to be having these conversations a lot recently with that kind of age person. And I remember saying, well, if I knew I was going to be a doctor, I'd be fine. If I knew I was going to be a pilot, I'd be fine. If I knew I was going to be something. And I felt so envious of the people who had a path. You know, felt so envious of people who knew what to do next because there was an end game. So it was like a doctor or a pilot or a dentist or whatever the things were that you could identify. And of course, I didn't have that direct vocational link with something that gave me at least some slither of a path that wasn't maybe a life path, but it gave you some skeleton to build yourself around. And it just made me think, like, I wonder what it is to, I've always wondered what kind of part of education at that point, when you're kind of working out what work you might do in the world, I wonder what it might be like to, instead of try and solve that problem of not knowing what we're going to do, but to come back to ourselves and to realize what we have is a different way of being in that question of what on earth am I supposed to do with myself. Because I think a lot of young people now, and I include myself in this because it felt like this at the time, but maybe to a lesser degree, you know, come out of any kind of formal education and the world is really, it's a confusing place in all kinds of ways. And there's no kind of bridge in coming out of education and coming into something else that's to do with earning money and surviving in the world without your parents or that kind of thing. And plenty of people, you know, start that way earlier than I did, which was about, you know, 18 or 19. And yeah, I guess that the conversation's making me think about all the ways that we're not serving our young people in the way that we might do. And that actually it might not be a problem to be solved, but there might be a way of being in it that will be more helpful than the way of being that we currently have now, which is to approach it as a problem to be solved, approaching our lives as problems to be solved. Mm. And your invitation to looking to what's here and having a relationship to this dynamic of feeling like there's something missing all the time. I wonder what the conversation might be and how it might reorient people and how we might address the future differently by being full of ourselves, which is obviously what we're taught not to be as children, you know. And so there's this weird relationship there of, you know, parents who say, you know, don't get too big for your boots or whatever it is. And yet, if we were to be filled with self and awareness of what's here and who we are more deeply, maybe this wouldn't be such a terribly confusing, tricky time that extends and extends and extends because we feel powerless and like we don't know this. The world is so big. How do we navigate it?
We've come to that time, Lizzie, where we have to end, and I want to end by saying back something that you just said, which I think is such a radical and important question for us in our lives that we might all take up, which is, what would happen is if we came at our lives, and I think you said it almost this way, I might be putting a little twist on it here. What would it be if we came at our lives as if we weren't problems to be solved? That might then orient us completely differently to how we come at this one very short and very precious life that we get to lead. I really appreciate you bringing that in. And I'm glad that we found a way to do this amidst the roar of the traffic and the, you know, all of the things that come when we try and stay with a practice every week, come what may.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the roars and the people and everything. I'm literally in a kind of festival situation and scrabbling around everywhere trying to find somewhere to be.
It's life, right as it's lived.
Certainly life, yeah.
And, one of the things I know that we've got very committed to here, Lizzie, is you and I, is doing something that's real above doing something that's perfect and shiny. And so I'm so glad to have been in another very real conversation with you and to be able to share it with so many other people as well. So thank you everyone for joining us and staying with us as we enter into week 90, whatever we're in, of this project. And so the last thing from me to say is thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.